Howdy there, folks. This is Geist with another Destiny 2 video. Today we're going to be talking about the most recent TWAB released by Bungie, and more specifically, we're going to be talking about the weapon changes that are incoming. Some big changes here, most predominantly to shotguns and our 120 hand cannons. So let's get right into the patch notes. So, to start off, intended special weapon roles in PvP. Most special weapons should have one situation where they're the dominant choice, and if caught outside of this, you should be at a disadvantage. Makes sense. But the big note here is that special ammo abundance in PvP distorts these roles, allowing play that wouldn't be possible otherwise, and is something we're looking to address. This is something major, as this is something I just discussed on a recent video, where I was talking about how special ammo was just far too abundant. And it's amazing that almost immediately here the next week Bungie's talking about that. So I'm really excited about that change in particular, and hopefully we see that sooner rather than later, where they're starting to limit the special ammo in PvP quite a bit. So these intended rules are sniper rifles, engaging at long range with aiming skill. Shotguns, engaging at point blank range using skill at movement or positioning to get close enough for a 1 or 2 hit elimination. Fusion rifles, engaging at mid-range but with careful positioning and pre-charging around cover. That one's kind of a joke. And trace rifles, strong at close to mid-range at the cost of not being a one-hit elimination. Sort of a niche weapon with those. And grenade launchers, useful for weakening opponent, getting damage around corners with bounces, or getting a one-hit elimination with a direct impact. Okay, so first major change incoming, and this is going to be to shotguns. Shotguns are way too prevalent in PvP and definitely too dominant. That's sort of the abbreviated version of that large paragraph there, and I fully agree. So to combat this, Bungie is increasing the aggressive frame shotgun cone angle from 4 to 4.25 degrees. If I understand that correctly, it means that the shotgun's going to have a little bit more spread. So at longer ranges, or at least at the further end of its fall off, it's going to be a little bit less reliable on the one-shot kill. They're also reducing shotgun damage fall off minimum by 2 meters and increasing shotgun damage fall off max by 2 meters. Slug shotguns are unaffected by this change. So what that's going to do is, or what it effectively means, is that shotguns are not going to be as effective at getting those long-range one-hit kills. It's going to reduce their ability to do so by a couple of meters. So in order to get the one shot, you're going to have to be significantly closer. However, that part about reducing the shotgun damage fall-off minimum means that the shotguns are going to be able to two-tap a little bit more effectively further out. So I guess they're trying to, not completely neuter them, make them feel useless in CQC fights, but they don't want them to be just so unstoppable. And I definitely agree with this. I don't really care too much about the whole better two-tap potential. I think that that's actually kind of frustrating, because it's annoying when a player runs up, misses the one-shot kill, and then just blasts you a second time. I think that's kind of BS with a shotgun. I think it should be pretty high risk reward to charge in, and it shouldn't be so forgiving, but we'll just see how these changes affect everything and see how it goes going forward. Next major change that's coming is going to be, of course, to 120 RPM hand cannons. They are going to be reducing the precision damage multiplier from 1.8 to 1.6, preventing a 10% damage bonus from allowing two-tapping in PvP. They're also reducing aim assist minimum fall-off distance by 1 to 2 meters depending on the range stat. As well, they're going to be reducing the damage and minimum fall-off distance by 1 meter. Basically, what this equates to, they're not touching the range so much. They're doing it just a little bit to bring them just a hair closer to the other hand cannons. And they're also going to be reducing the aim assist there. So what that's going to mean is it's going to be a little bit less sticky at longer ranges. So at those longer ranges, players are going to have to be a lot more accurate instead of the hand cannons being just so forgiving. And hopefully that's going to be something that gets addressed to hand cannons in general. They are fairly forgiving. You do kind of just get a headshot for being somewhere in the vicinity of the head. But the big thing, and this is exactly what I just talked about in a previous video, they're reducing their ability to two-tap, and they're also lowering their burst, because they're going to do less precision damage overall. They're not going to feel quite so bursty, so they're not going to be as powerful in team fights. And biggest and most importantly is they're not going to be two-tapping constantly, because right now we've got a lot of damage increasing sources that are allowing them to do so, and it makes them kill in an almost unstoppable amount of time just because of how high their impact is. So it's really nice to see that change. Next, they're also going to be making a few changes to some of our perks. Drop mag can no longer roll on new drops of weapons and will have its functionality changed later. There's a change coming next season that requires adjusting this and some perks with similar functionality. More on that later. Pulse monitor fixed an issue where the handling bonus was no longer applying. Rewind rounds fixed an issue where the perk would not trigger if the last shot in the magazine missed or if the player reloaded another weapon before firing the final shot. And reservoir burst. We've seen the complaints that the detonation on kills doesn't feel that reliable or impactful, so this has been updated with the same consistency and speed fix as Dragonfly. Can't really say I use a lot of those perks too often, but for rewind rounds, that's definitely a great one because that is an amazing perk, so that's good to see that they're making sure that it's a little bit more reliable. Okay, so this next one is it's a big one. Everybody's been talking about this for a while. Bungie is going to be nerfing Dead Man's Tale just because it's so dominant in Crucible. But they're wanting to do it in such a way that isn't going to make it completely neutered on console because PC is where it's really overpowered. And that's mostly just because of the inherent accuracy on PC. You've got people run around spamming the hip fire incredibly accurately, and the hip fire is super deadly, and it's just kind of dominating at all ranges. The hip fire should really only be used at close range. I've always kind of said this. Now, granted, I am a console player. So they're removing the hip fire damage fall off scaler, so the hip fire damage is going to have a fairly steep fall off, whereas previously it had none. And the aim assist cone angle is going to be reduced from 1.5 to 1.2. What that's going to mean is that you've got to be more accurate from the hip, and you really have to mostly just use it close range, as the weapon was intended. On console, this isn't going to affect us as much. I've preached this for a while, that if you're at longer and mid ranges with DMT, you should not be hip firing. It's just not that consistent. Now, granted, if you land a bunch of body shots, it'll kill in a decent time, but most other weapons are just going to aim down sights and kill you a lot more easily. And with the way that aiming works on console, guns that aren't aiming down sights are really just not that reliable. So Dead Man's, the hip fire is still going to be good. It's still going to have its damage. It's still going to have its rate of fire. But the damage is only going to stick at closer ranges, which is where that hip fire was intended to be used. So it's still going to be a very good all-around weapon, but for the most part, people need to be aiming down sights, and it's still a powerful weapon like this. This doesn't destroy the weapon by any means because it's essentially, it's got all of the strengths of a 120 hand cannon, but it doesn't have any fall-off. The sights aren't quite as open, obviously, as they are on a hand cannon, but that's really the only downside. Otherwise, it's still really, really sticky aiming down sights as far as landing those headshots. It basically hands them to you. There's almost no recoil visually whenever you're using the gun, and that's definitely a big bonus. It's not nearly as disorienting as using a 120 hand cannon. And, of course, it has effectively no fall-off on any of our maps. So it's still going to be a very strong weapon. And hopefully this will be the only touch they have to make to sort of bring it in line. I'd hate to see our strongest scout rifle get any more nerfs. Maybe now they can focus on buffing some of our other exotic scout rifles, which are definitely underperforming. And so, now that we've gotten through all the nerfs, here's a buff. Sleeper got buffed, or rather, it got the buff that it should have gotten when the rest of the linears were buffed. And they're fixing the issue where it wasn't benefiting as much as the linear fusions when they received that precision damage buff. Total buff is now 16.5% compared to the other 15% buff that the others received. So not only did it get what the rest got, it got a little bit extra, so that now Sleeper Simulant is supposed to be the clear winner when it comes to damage among all the linear fusions. And that'll be interesting to see. It might even be useful for some boss damage phases. We'll just have to check it out. And I'm going to abbreviate this one here just a little bit, but some future changes they're also planning. Fusion rifles are getting a complete rework. Whether this will be a buff, nerf, or a bit of both just to kind of bring them more into their role, we will see. Breach grenade launchers are going to get a little bit of a tuning. They're probably going to nerf them just a little bit, just because they're expecting an increase in usage since shotguns are going to be getting nerfed. And scout rifles and hand cannons in PvE are probably going to get a damage buff just because they are, and this is definitely true, they feel underperforming. When you're using something like a 120 hand cannon on a red bar, you feel like you should just kill it with one shot. And the same can be said of scout rifles. It just feels like these two weapon archetypes are taking way too much time to kill on some of the weaker enemies in PvE, so it's nice that they're planning on addressing that. Some more changes that they're planning on doing. They are going to be increasing the effectiveness of machine guns in PvE since they are currently underperforming. Special ammo economy is going to be changed, particularly in PvP. Thank goodness, that's going to be a very welcome change, so it's going to be less prevalent, hopefully. Anarchy is going to be getting nerfed. It's been doing too well for too long. I fully agree on that. It would be nice to see a little more viability with some other things and not just use Anarchy or fail. And exotic primaries. They're going to be. They say that they want to give us more reasons to use exotic primary weapons in high-end PvE. I fully agree. Can't wait to see what that means, what that's going to bring. I think if you're using your exotic slot, then that exotic should be viable in everything. So that's going to be really cool to see. And I hope we see some major buffs incoming to some of those, maybe even some boss DPS ability with our exotic primaries. There may also be more changes incoming to special weapons, just depending on how these next few weeks go. They are also planning on rolling out more tweaks to some of our exotics. It's possible that we may be getting some changes with a bunch of them, or even a catalyst with this upcoming mid-season update. That's sort of what the notes are saying here, sort of hinting or alluding to it. But also, in the future, they're planning on addressing orb generation with exotics and kill trackers on exotics. It would be nice if all of the older exotics that have those trackers will be getting crucible trackers as well. Not everybody cares about that, but I've always kind of liked that. So hopefully we see that coming in, and hopefully some of our weapons that really need some catalysts are going to be getting those. I really hope we're going to be seeing some of these things in the coming week. That would be pretty amazing to see. And with that, that wraps up our discussion on the TWAB this week and all the incoming sandbox changes. Let me know in the comments what you guys are most excited about. I'm most excited about the exotic primary changes incoming, as you all know. But as always, guys, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.